Okay. Let's keep the conversation rated PG. That's recorded now. And we are now videoing. I want to make sure that if I have the... Yeah, tell him we're on. Maybe does he need a new link? I don't know. Is that an issue?
Should this will work today?
Okay. Okay, so we're holding today Daf Ches. Let's just contextualize everything we've been discussing. We're holding really like, I feel like sometimes when you're in yeshiva, for sure, and you're in a sugya, sometimes it could feel like you need like to come up for breath every once in a while to just remember, what are you doing here? Like you get really bogged down to the details, and it's heavy. So what we're discussing over here is the sugya. If you remember from the very beginning on Daf Gimel, we had discussed that the mitzvah of yibum doesn't apply when the woman who's falling to you is an erva. Let's leave out all the complicated diagrams. But if your brother is married to someone who is an erva to you, that woman is pater from yibum. There's no yibum with her. Not only that, if she's married to him and he has a second wife, even that lady's usher. We talked about Tzara saying, and mitzvah Hashem, we probably won't get to it today at the end of today's daf, but it'll start coming back to Tzara a little bit. The Gemara had brought a drasha to explain it. The pasuk was the pasuk by Achos Isha. The pasuk by Achos Isha tells us a lot of information. The pasuk says that an Isha lachos lesikach, meaning a woman and her sister you shouldn't marry. Litzrar we understood earlier it meant to include not only her but her tzara. Legalo servasa. Litzrar in Hebrew literally means to cause pain or to cause stress. But we understood the drasha to mean litzrar, to mean not only is she not going to do yibum with you, but even the woman, her co-wife, her tzara is not going to do it. And we explained that. That was how we learned earlier. That was the brisa. The Gemara then was struggling to try to figure out, why do I even need a pasuk to teach me that I'm not supposed to have even with an erva? Why do I even need this pasuk? Meaning, why would I ever think to assume that you do yibum with an erva? Why would I ever think you do yibum with a tzaras erva? Once you tell me an erva is an erva is pater, because we went and struggled to try to figure it out, and they took us daf dalet, daf hey, daf vav, and now daf zayin, 4 full dapim to really address that issue. When we thought perhaps maybe the reason could be because of esadech v'loisaseh, which we went through in relative detail, that a positive commandment is going to push off a negative commandment. But we don't say that when the negative commandment is a negative commandment that is a kares commandment. Allah has written by Achos Ishto. Right? It's a regular. Right. And then the pasuk also said, Aleha there to teach me that just like Achos Ishto is aser, and the word Aleha is over there, and then it says in the parsha of Yibum, Yevama, Yavai, Aleha. So that Zereshava of Aleha tells me that the pasuk of Achos Ishto is talking even in a matzav of Yibum. Even when it's talking about Yibum, even when there's a mitzvah, don't sleep with your wife's sister. Meaning to say, Erev is pater from Yibum. And we understood once we understood that, we extended it to all the other Arabs. So the question is, what did I need that for? Why would I think in Erev you're going to do Yibum with to begin with? This was a conversation we had earlier. The Gemara took a break from that question to address Esadich L'Saseh on its own. It came back to it eventually, and we went through almost every one of the Yud Gimel Midos to try to figure out how are we going to actually have this thought that we would extrapolate from to need a pasuk by Erva by Yibum. Why do I even need it? No, I'm reviewing it because today is going to be hopefully we're going to be reintroducing ourselves back into the real meat of Yevamos, which is exciting, and also I want to make sure we reorient, whatever. Thank you, ourselves back in Yevamos. So now the question is, what was the last attempt to explain why I need the pasuk of Aleha to teach me that you don't do yibum with an erva? Meaning, why would I have thought you do? We came on to an idea of hoyel v'ishteri, which is a very big shas topic, but local for us, it meant that we see that just like in the case of the Mitzorah, who has a right to go into the Azara. The Azara was a place that a Tful Yom is not allowed to go into, but a Mechusar Kippurim, the Mitzorah, who has gone to the mikvah, waited that night, and all he's got to do is wake up in the morning, head to the base of Mikdash to go bring his karbanos. He's got to get some blood on his right thumb, his right ear, and his right toe. Now the problem was that when he walks into the Azara, which he's allowed to do, he's got to stand in an area. And then he's got to sort of like stick his thumb, stick his toe, and stick his, what do you think, what's it called? His ear into the Azara. The Azara he's not allowed to be in. Ezras Nashim he's allowed to be in. Sorry, yeah.
No, he's not being Azara. You're not going to that.
No, Azara. The Azara is the inside. He's not allowed to go into the Azara as a Mechusar Kippurim. He's Chayv Kares. Right. He's still Tameh. Right. But so the Shar HaNikner, which is that area in between the Ezras Nashim and the Azara, has this special status that although it's physically sort of like a peninsula that juts out into the Azara. And standing in there, it has the status of the Ezras Nashim. So the Mitzorah is allowed to be there. And the special heter of the Torah is that he could stick his fingers and toes and ears in, and that's not called like he's in the Azara, which would normally be Chayiv Karas. The Azara is the general area of the Beis Hamikdash where you have the Mizbeach, where the Shechting is happening, and then even on the more interior of that, you have the Heichal with the Kodesh Kodashim and all the holy sites. Yeah. So now, this is a special heter the Torah gave this person, the Mitzorah, who's a Mechusik Kippurim, to do such a thing. No one else has this heter if he's in that status. It's only this Mitzorah who has that heter. If this guy happens to, Erev Pesach, become a Tful Yom, I don't want to get too far into the detail. Oh, he's on, great.
Carry.
So if he becomes a Balkari, a person sees a seminal emission that day. He woke up in the morning and he had every right to go into the Shara Nikner and stick his ear and his toe and his thumb into the other room. And that was okay. The Torah gives him a special heter. He's a card-carrying member of the I'm allowed to stick my thumb in that side of the wall. Yeah? Now, problem is that he's the only one who carries that. Normally a Tful Yom, not only is a Tful Yom not supposed to be in the Azara where the Mitzorah is now standing, he's not even allowed to be in the Ezras Nashim. He's not allowed to be on Har HaBayis. He has to be outside of what we call Machaneh Leviah or the Har HaBayis. So now, what happens if this guy became a Tful Yom on Erev Pesach? So now, tonight, he wants to have his Korban Pesach. And although he's not going to be Chayiv Karas if he doesn't do it, but we want him to do this mitzvah. It's a very chashuv mitzvah. So the rabbis came along and said, we have the opportunity to say that this Tful Yom was normally not allowed to be inside the Ezras Nashim. We're going to say he's allowed to go. Now, how do the rabbis do that? Well, the answer is all they're doing is saying that the asay of being in the Ezras Nashim, it's referred to as an Isser asay. It's a lava bom michlal asay. The Torah says, if you're a Tful Yom, get off the Har HaBayis. It's a mitzvah asay, positive commandment. Leave. That mitzvah say we're going to push away from the mitzvah say of Korban Pesach and say that he's allowed to go there. Okay, very nice. Everything I've said until now.
You're not undoing an issue. You're just undoing a mitzvah.
Yeah, exactly. A mitzvah say against a mitzvah say. This one comes with the kares, so I'm going to choose to go with this one more than the other.
Oh, we're gonna bring this to.
One second. Pay attention. Pay attention. What do you mean?
He came from the left field.
We only 35 hidden tzaddikim left.
Yeah,
I'm just pointing out.
it's true.
Now we know.
If it would be an issue, you wouldn't be able to do that.
If it would be allowed, we would say if it would be allowed, we would say Pashtus not, although it could be you'd say Asedech, let's say, but you're right. If it would be allowed, we wouldn't say. Let's say. Okay. So says the Gemara like this. We saw from Ula said the following chiddush, where he had the following question. So you've accomplished that the Tful Yom is allowed to go into the Ezras Nashim. Wonderful. That's great. But what right does he have to stick his right hand, his right toe, and his right ear into the Azara? He is a Tful Yom who is Chayiv Karis for doing it, just like a Mechusik Kippurim would be. It's just that the Mechusik Kippurim has a heter. This Tful Yom normally wouldn't have a heter. If somehow you can magically drop a Tful Yom, he breaks every Avera to get there. If he sticks his nose and his ear and his right thumb inside he's Chayiv Karis. So how is he allowed to do it? So on this, Ula says an argument. He makes the following case. He says, Hoil v'ishtri, since we're matir this guy's right ear, right thumb, and right toe for a Mitzorah, well, that same guy is going to be able to stick those same body parts in, even though he's a Tful Yom. Hoil v'ishtri. Meaning to say, there's a sequence. First, he's a Mitzorah. He has the heter, he has the right to stick these body parts in. Then he became a Tful Yom who normally wouldn't. We'll say that once we gave him the dispensation to do it, we're going to let him do it no matter what. This is the idea of Hoil v'ishtri. The Gemara now is going to attempt to say, so what? So too by Yibum, we're going to say the same thing? Meaning what? Meaning, normally Yibum is between a man and the wife of his dead brother, who normally would be usher to him as an Eishes Ach. That's a kares. It's an Erev relationship. So you want to say, since we're matir an Eishes Ach, now that Eishes Ach happens to be also his wife's sister or some other Erev, you want to say that's going to be mutter also because of the same argument? Just like the Mitzorah, who was the Mechusik Kippurim, was mutter, the Tful Yom was not, but the Mechusik Kippurim made the Tful Yom mutter. So too, the Eishes Ach, which is mutter, will make the Achus Isha, who's normally not mutter also. Hoil v'ishtri. That's the Gemara's attempt. Says the Gemara, and since I would have said that, Allah teaches me not like that. Says the Gemara, 1 second. Now inside. I'm going to say it outside.
Yeah, but this is, but there is an assay pushing up an assay. Over here, there's an
No, two different things.
Over here, there's a lot.
Two different things. The assay pushing off the assay has nothing to do with Hoil v'ishtri is a concept we're going to apply once we say that. Meaning that was its own, in Yeshivish we'd say it's a Zaytiga point, meaning to say that's an external piece that gets us to the point where I can even be discussing that the Tful Yom can even be there. Ul is coming to address, okay, so you've accomplished that. What right does he have to stick his ear in that area? That's not a lav. That's a lav sheish by kares. He's not allowed to stick his ear, his toe. According to Ula, that's considered a bia, meaning even just a little part of your body going in. I mean, I don't know what he would say by sukkah. Is it like if I just stick my toe in the sukkah, am I sitting in the sukkah? Obviously not. But in terms of going into the Beis Hamikdash, as a person who's tameh, he holds any part of your body goes in, it's like you're in. It's
I don't
like,
want to go on a tangent, but
so then don't say it.
okay.
No, unless it's very on target.
Very on target. No.
Okay, skip it. Unless you don't understand the Gemara.
No.
Okay. Says the Gemara like this. So says Ula, whole of Ishtri is the reason why I need Aleha to teach me that you don't do Yibum with this erva, because I would have said whole of Ishtri even Achosisha. Says the Gemara, and I want to say it outside to make sure we understand, and it might be helpful to show the diagram, but we'll say like this. What is the order of operations here? First, what happened was the guy was a mitzorah for a week. Then on his 7th day, he went to the mikveh. On the day he went to the mikveh, was he allowed to go into any of these things? No, he wasn't allowed to go into the harabayas until he becomes a tfil yom. Sorry, until that night. After the sun sets, stars come out. Now he's a mechusar kippurim. He's allowed to go onto the harabayas. He's not allowed to go into the azara. So at this moment in time, is he allowed to walk into the Shar HaNikner and get his ears and whatever it is?
No.
No, he can't,
Right.
because there's no carbon to bring. The heter only starts in the morning. When he wakes up in the morning, and now he can bring his carbon, now he gets to go in. No, that's a mechusar kippurim.
Right.
They only do when he's Mechutz Gevurah.
Yes.
Yeah. Tfil yom is the day before it says.
Yep.
Okay, so now, next question. This guy who is a mechusar kippurim has a heter only when he wakes up in the morning. So if he has the tfil, when does he see the carry? That day. No. You're jumping ahead a little bit. Yeah. No. He sees it in the morning. He wakes up in the morning. He's on his way to shul. He's going to go to the Beis Hamikdash. He's going to go bring some karbanas. Bam. He woke up in the morning. He had a heter. So then he has a bal carry. Now he becomes a tfil yom. Says ula hoil ve'ishtri ishtri. So the Gemara is now going to address what is the real apples to apples comparison to that case. So at first we thought, what do you mean hoil ve'ishtri? Once you tell me that the yavam is going to be mutter in the Eishasach, we'll say even on the Achosisha. That sounds very nice. But shouldn't it matter which Isser applies? Meaning to say, what if the Eishasach Isser didn't happen first, but rather the Isser that came first is the Achosisha Isser? How could that happen?
Never history.
Right. Meaning to say, what if it predates it? Now, how could that happen? It's very simple. In our case, remember, Shimon's always dying. So Ruvain marries a lady first. Now, that lady who has a sister, the sister is usher to him. We're not even talking about Yibam.
The specific thing that's left with me with the Arab in general is left. It doesn't matter which flavor.
What do you mean?
That means it doesn't matter if it's Achlezish or Hechizach. Either way, the Arab of that whole sugya is listed. So it doesn't matter which one is what.
So the Gemara discussed that a little bit before as to exactly whether through a Zereshava or a Hekesh.
Permitted. The only reason why is because you're saying it's history was that it was permitted. If it's not permitted, you can't. There's no.
True. It has to start from Eishasach.
Yeah,
it has to start from Eishasach.
Right,
Definitely has to start from Eishasach. But your question is, once the erva is removed, so the erva is lifted. So that's discussed already a little bit on the Gemara beforehand. We talked about, maybe we'll learn about Matzino. Yeah. What's that?
Keep going.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So now, what are we saying? We're saying, Ishtari will mean that this guy is mutter to be with his Eishasach. Once we're going to lift that, if she just so happens to be Achosisha, we'll say she's mutter also for the same argument. But let's work it out. Let's say Reuven marries a woman. We'll call her Rachel. Rachel has a sister, Leah. Right now, before Reuven has a brother, before anything with his brothers. His brother's not married to anybody. Is Reuven allowed to be with Leah? Leah, Rachel's sister.
No.
Why not?
Two sisters.
Not allowed to be with someone's sister. If you're married to a woman,
Correct.
you cannot sleep with a sister.
That's one of the 15.
That's one of the 15. It's right there in Achremos. So that means that if I marry a woman, I can't be with a sister. Now, if my brother decides to go marry the sister now, he's added upon the already prohibited lady another Isser, the wife of my brother. Once he marries her, he's allowed to. Nothing wrong with the brother marrying sisters.
Right.
It's a little weird, but it happens. It actually probably happens nowadays. A little weird, but no big deal.
You see on social media, the twins.
There you go. Boom. Normal guys. They are. I didn't even know that. Who they married to?
Two sisters.
Okay, tangent. Okay,
Yeah.
so, yeah. Okay, yeah. Okay. So
No, I
that
don't
means
know, yeah.
the Isser of Eishes Ach happens when? First, it happens second. First, she's us to me because she's my wife's sister. Now, on top of that, there's a second problem. She's my brother's wife. So now, if that were to be the case, you certainly couldn't say in that scenario, Hoyel Ishtari, because the first Isser was something that's not Ishtari. The first Isser was something that I have until the late my wife dies. Chas v'shalom, yeah? Until as long as my wife's alive, that woman is her sister, I can't be with her.
The brother.
The fact that Yibum is matir the second Isser doesn't help me with the first Isser. It predates it.
Right.
What are we going to go lemafreya? We're going to go back in time and re-uproot the Naveira that existed beforehand? So if we're going to have a conversation about all of history, the conversation doesn't start unless the marriage with Shimon happens first. Meaning,
So say that it's permitted because if it was in Shimon's scenario, then we'd have to allow it. So that for Reuben, we allow it.
could be, but first we have to address the Shimon issue to see if it even would be mutter.
The Shimon Shamash is that's an Isser.
So wait one second. Let me speak it out. Let's say Shimon
Only
first.
before, like yesterday, last night.
I want to say it out first, and then when I put the diagram, yeah. Shimon marries Leah.
Separate woman.
Am I also on Rachel yet? No.
No.
Who's Rachel to me?
No.
Nobody. I'm allowed to marry her. No big deal. So if Shimon marries Leah, the only reason why Leah is usher to me right now is because she's my brother's wife, which is the Isser that the Torah is matir when Yibum says, go marry your sister's wife, your brother's wife. So far, everything's fine. Now I go marry Rachel. Well, now Shimon, my brother's wife, is not only usher to me as my brother's wife, she's also usher to me as my wife's sister. But it now went in the opposite order. Now, the sequence of when she became usher to me as my achos isha happened after she became usher to me as my eshesach. That's a lot more similar to the case of Ula. Again, what was Ula's statement? Mitzor is usher first, then he became a tvil yom of a balkari. So hol v'ishtri zeh. So we'll say the same thing about Yibam. Hol v'ishtri the eser eshesach, which happened first because first I married. Sorry, first Shimon married, right? And only afterwards did I marry. So the achos isha came later.
Is there a Shabbat?
Not yet. No, we're not there yet. What's
Is
that?
there a
The
Shabbat?
other way
No,
around,
it's one
doesn't
second.
it come at the same time?
What's that?
On the other way around, doesn't it come at the same time?
No, why?
It's just first.
So let's talk from Leah's perspective. Leah was just really wants to be with Kevin, really badly. But what happened? Kevin's brother went ahead and married Rachel. So now, all of a sudden, I'm still allowed to be with Leah.
When Leah wasn't married, there was no Ashes Ah.
There was nothing. When no one was married, there's no
Both
Isser.
of them came at the same time.
No, I mean, what do you mean?
When
My
Shimon
chassan was on
was
Sunday night at 7. His chassan was on Sunday night at 7. Yeah, meaning one marriage had to have happened first. Whichever marriage happened first created an Isser first.
Which one are we saying started first?
Right?
Yeah.
Leah is just an independent person.
The sister, Rachel's sister. But yeah,
Right, but Reuben has nothing to do with Leah.
at that point.
Right.
Right. But the question is Rachel. Rachel is definitely us. Right. Now I marry Leah. Reuben goes marries Leah. Rachel's us for two reasons now. It's Leah's sister, and it's his brother's wife.
Is
But
Leah
brother's wife
mentioned
happened
in the
first.
Torah?
What's that?
The case of Leah, or Reuben marrying Leah, or Shimon marrying Leah, is that in the Torah also?
Achos Isha is in the Torah. That's
Yeah.
one of the ervas.
Right.
And Eshesach is
No,
in
it
the Torah.
doesn't say in order.
Yeah.
Not, that's, I
I'm-
just want to know to make sure that that's in the.
I'm expressing the idea that the Gemara is going to bring up in a moment to say if we're going to look at Ula as a precedent for Hoyel v'Ishtari, we have to make an apples to apples comparison. We have to have the thing that's being used to permit happen before the thing that we're trying to permit afterwards, right?
Which is what?
So we're trying to make Achos Isha mutter because we already said Eishesach is mutter. But if the Achos Isha came before the Eishesach, that won't work. And then the Gemara is going to say one more point. Even this I'm going to need to draw. Okay, so let's look at it like this. Can everyone see?
Easier for me to. It's been terrible.
Want to draw?
When
I draw?
people can't see when they're.
No, no, I.
Oh, yeah.
I was watching the race last night. Kevin.
I don't know. Because I think it's easier to draw it as you're doing it. You have Reuben, you have Shimon. What I just explained was you have Rachel and Leah and Rachel are sisters. Okay. So now remember, Shimon's the one who's going to be going kaput. We're going to be discussing it from Reuben's perspective. So what we said was that if Reuben marries Rachel first, so right now Leah is already usher to him. Why? Other one. Achos Isha. It's a sister. It's the wife's sister. So she's already ushered to him. If Shimon dies now, is he allowed to marry Leah? No. Leah's not his brother's wife. It doesn't fall into that parsha. Now, so Leah now goes and marries Shimon. So now she's also usher because of the other thing. Eishes ach. She is his brother's wife, and she was
It's not comparable.
right. So therefore, this happened first, this happened second, and this is the thing that needs to be making this mutter. That's backwards. The sequence is out. Yeah?
Okay.
Okay. So now let's fix it. What's the case? The case must be talking about where first,
One who died.
yeah, first,
Correct.
Shimon married Leah. Now Leah is usher to Reuven as an Eishes ach. This is literally the most vanilla case of even we've had ever. Reuven and Shimon are brothers. Shimon's married to a lady. That lady is now usher to Reuven. But if Shimon dies, she'd be mutter because of evil. Now Reuven marries Rachel, adding upon Leah to Reuven a separate sister of Achosisha, the sister of my wife. This now is happening second, and this is happening first, which is good because Eishes ach is what the Torah says is mutter. The Torah never says Achosisha is mutter. So Hoyel Ishtri Eishes ach, which comes first. Now we could say Achosisha is going to be mutter. That's what the Gemara's comparison I just said, sitting down without drawing it. Now let me make the following point. This all works, but the problem is that this woman Leah, did she ever become mutter to Reuven? No, because Shimon didn't die yet. Now Shimon dies, they're falling in one fell swoop with both attached isurim to Reuven. Reuven can't be with an Achosisha. Who says Hoyel v'ishtari works if you've never been practically allowed to marry the woman?
It only happens when Shimon dies. Is
Yes.
that where?
So we're going to do it one more time, and this time around it's going to be what the Gemara is going to conclude. Shimon. So now start again. You have sisters. Shimon marries Leah and dies. Leah is now allowed to be with Reuven. Why? Because of evil. So the first issur that was on Reuven with Leah was Eishes ach, which was usher. And then he died, she became mutter. So Hoyel v'ishtri, okay, so we're halfway done. Now Reuven goes and marries Rachel.
Instead of marrying Leah,
Instead of doing his responsibility and being with Leah, he goes and marries Rachel.
that's not a sin.
It is.
It's all about avoiding it. It's all
But
about
Min HaTorah, 100% mutter. And Min HaTorah, it's chal. The kedushin works. No problem. Reuven can be with Rachel. They're now married. When he married her, all of a sudden he just turned his Yevama into an Achosisha.
And then we know that Achosisha remains after that.
It doesn't remain after the wife's death.
No, the husband.
There's no reason to assume it doesn't, like any other area.
It's no longer Achosisha.
Yeah, it is.
So
Still.
your brother's dead.
No, it's Achosisha. Your wife Rachel is Leah. It's not Eishes anymore, but it's still Achosisha. Reuven is now married to Rachel, who turned Leah into his wife's sister. So this second issur now happens after the first one, but it happens also after the first one became mutter. So this is true case of Hoyel v'ishtri. Because if you wouldn't have this, so what? Did one happen before the other? The Mitzorah wasn't allowed to walk into the Beis Hamikdash the night before. Let's say he would have became a Baal Kari the night before, where he was never able to walk into the Beis Hamikdash. He was only allowed to walk into the Beis Hamikdash when he woke up in the morning. Let's say he became a Baal Kari the night before. Ula would say, can't do that. Sorry, no heter. Hoyel v'ishtri doesn't work there. So that would be the same thing. So what we're going to say in the Maskana of the Gemara is, what's Aleha teaching me? At least according to the first answer of the Gemara, that you don't do Ibam? This case.
Right.
That's the whole thing. After the whole 4 dot, why do I need a letter to tell me that I don't need to do Ibam with an erva? Why would I have had a havamina that you do even with an erva? Kamash Malon, you're right. You wouldn't. Why? I say it's not there. And all of the other attempts to say that you should have done it is not good. Hoyel v'ishtri itself won't work for the first couple of cases. It's for this case. But Reuven and Shimon are brothers. Shimon, the one who's going to die, gets married first to a woman, dies. Then Reuven, incorrectly really, goes and marries Shimon's widow's sister. And then, now he created a second issur. So do we say that he can now be with Leah or not? And
So in this case where Yevamos doesn't apply, do you have to?
only once the Torah says Aleha, yeah?
Chalitza doesn't apply either.
Yes, correct. This would be a case of therefore, yeah, let me see, make sure. Is the order good here? You guys see this? Because I might reference this as I'm reading the Gemara. Okay.
So we're going on the assumption that Ula's carry is in the day, which is he didn't say specifically.
Yeah, there was the lashon of the Gemara. The Rishon was speaking about. There's a diak in the words of Ula. The words of Ula are. Let me find
It
this.
almost always carries at night. I mean,
That's
a
true.
rare event.
The Tanya Mitzora Shechal Shaloi be'erev Pesach ve'ra keri boi bayom. So the language of boi bayom, the Rishonim wanna. It's not a lock. It's not a lock. They want to be medayik from there. But you are correct. That is a good point. And the distinction would then be is that by seeing it by day, what's the difference by day by night? Technically, Mechusar Kippurim, in a hypothetical sense, is allowed to go into that section of the Beis Hamikdash. But since there are no korbanos being brought at that moment, and it's not a matzav of carbon, he doesn't have a heter to do. Okay.
You know, carbonates are brought at night.
Generally, yeah, no.
So you
I mean,
only do it during the day when Kabbalah of blood.
Yes, and since by the time he woke up in the morning, he already had the carry the night before. He never had the heter. Ula would never say, in that case, that we're going to let this tumas bal carry until Yom go into the Beis Hamikdash. Okay. Says the Gemara. We're holding on the bottom of Zayin and Midbeis. We're going to read inside what we just did on the board. Says the Gemara. The Omer Ula matam hoil v'huter l'tzarasa huter l'kruya. This is just the last line of the previous Gemara that Ula's whole idea of hoil v'ishtri is once the Mitzorah is allowed to, Mechusar Kippurim is allowed to go in to deal with his tzaras issues, and his fingers can go into the Azara. We're going to allow the Tzvul Yom, who normally isn't allowed to do it, to go. Says the Gemara, midami l'de'ula. This is going to be the first thing we spoke about. Is this really an apples to apples comparison? Teinach hecha de nasa mace. Here, mace is going to mean Shimon in our cases, okay? Teinach, this works hecha de nasa mace when Shimon married first, creating the Isser Eshes Ach first. Ve'achakach nasachai, and then Reuven got married, adding upon the Isser Eshes Ach another Isser of Achos Isha. The migu the ishtri Isser Eshes Ach. We could say that since the first Isser of Eshes Ach becomes mutter, because the Torah says Yibum, ishtri nami Isser Achos Isha. I'll say now that the second Isser of Achos Isha is also going to become mutter. However, Elanosachai, let's say first Reuven got married, creating first an Isser of Achos Isha. Ve'achakach nasa mace, and only then did Shimon marry, creating now the new Isser of Eshes Ach. Then we would say Isser Achos Isha Kadim. The Isser of Achos Isha predates the Isser of Eshes Ach. So therefore, So therefore, it shouldn't work. Now the Gemara says the second thing I said, which was an even if nasa mace nami, even if you'll talk about the case we said 2 seconds ago, when Shimon is the one who gets married first, creating the Isser Eshes Ach first. That still is only going to work in the following scenario. Teinach hecha de nasa mace, and here's the key line: umace. He has to die. So this woman who's an Eshes Ach actually becomes mutter to him, so that you can accomplish the first half of Ula's comment of hoil v'ishteri. You need the ishteri. Ishteri means it's mutter. If it's not mutter, you can't say hoil v'ishteri ishteri. So first you have to have Shimon dying, making his wife, the widow, fall to you in Yibum and actually being mutter to you. Then you went ahead at Nasa Mace. You went ahead, v'achakach Nasa Chai. Then Reuven now goes and marries the sister. Let's say he marries Rachel, creating now a separate Isser on top of this woman of Achos Isha. The Chazyale de Beini, and for a moment this woman was mutter to him. Leah was allowed to be with him. Why? Because Yibum was matir the Isser of Eshes Ach. That would be the case. So the Gemara says, Ela nasa mace velo mace. But let's say it's like the case we said where Shimon got married first, but didn't die, and rather then Reuven goes and marries the sister. Ve'achkach nasachai, right? So then lo yichzad liklal. There's never a point when Leah was ever mutter to him ever. So there's no hoil v'ishteri there. Milo Modi Ula, wouldn't Ula, who said hoil v'ishteri, wouldn't he agree to the following case? Sheimra Keri Belel Shmini, if he had seen Keri the night before, meaning he had never woken up in the morning and been allowed to actually go into the Azara with his ears, toes, and thumb, right? But he would agree in that scenario, She'ein Machnis Yadav Labonos, that no way tomorrow would this guy be allowed to go in to the Azara with his ears, nose, and throat, whatever. You know what I mean? He wouldn't be allowed to stick his thing in there because he'd have no heter. Because he never had a heter, because whole v'ishri is never going to be said. Right? Why? There was never a moment in time when he was allowed to bring a carbon, because already by the nighttime when he was still usher, we had to know what Tumah come on him. So the same thing was by Yibum, right? Meaning to say that just like, you're right, okay, so the Eshes Ach comes first, but it came off. He's still usher as an Eshes Ach, calls him on the brothers alive. And now he added on top of it another Isser. So who says that just because half of the Isser goes away, that the other half goes away? He has to die first. The Gemara says, you're right. Meaning the Gemara was asking it as a kasha. The answer to the Gemara is, yeah, you're right. Aleha is teaching me exactly that. Had the Torah not said Aleha, I would have thought that in this scenario specifically, and it's very important to point out over here, that Bito, let's say, doesn't eat aleha. This scenario is only possible when you're talking about marriage. Only on the erevas in the Mishnah that are built on a marriage where sequence matters. But if it's an inherent ereva, like your daughter, well, your daughter is your daughter well before she'll ever be your brother's wife. So it'll always predate. So there's never going to be an ishtri. The only scenario of ishtri is going to be in a scenario of marriage where it's possible to have the Isser Eshes Ach come later or before, right? And since it can become before, the guy could die before the marriage takes place. I don't want to go down that road of going through all the examples, but you'll just have to take my word for it.
It's a little confusing, but yeah.
I hate the English words. Give me an example. What's a stepchild? That's a
If someone gets married and
Yeah.
his wife had kids from previous marriage.
yes. That's yes.
Yes.
Yes, that's one of the examples. That's one of the examples of what I'm just saying now. I don't want to go down that road.
10-second tangent.
Yeah.
You're not allowed to do something that avoids a mitzvah. This is why the Cheder Rabbinic Gershon is that you shouldn't marry sisters to avoid this scenario.
So I'm not sure, but I've read something to that effect, meaning that by marrying, there's a case we're going to see hopefully on Amud Beis that talks about if you have Reuven, Shimon, and Levi, and let's say Shimon and Levi are married to two, or Reuven and Shimon, whatever, are married to two sisters, and both brothers die at the exact same time, right? So they both dying at the exact same time in a car accident, whatever it is, both leaving no kids, and now a guy has two sisters falling to him. What's he supposed to do? It's similar.
I
Yeah.
have a question.
Yeah.
When he has to do Yibam and he's going to marry Rachel beforehand, are you allowed to, if you
No.
have a mitzvah that you have to do, you're allowed to go,
No, he did it on
No. He's not allowed to do that,
but he
But
did
only-
it.
but
he did it.
but he did it, and
Got it.
since it's only Asr Min Derabanan,
Got
it
it.
works.
I got
Meaning
it.
normally,
I
if
got
let's
it.
say it's Asr Min
Right.
HaKairos,
Right.
Kares, then he can't do it at all.
Right.
Wouldn't take effect. Yeah, that's a very good question. Yeah, it's a good question. Okay. Are we good?
Yes.
Okay. We're going to see on today's daf 3 answers to why we need Allah. We've been searching and searching. Today is when we find the pot of gold. Pot of gold, the first pot of gold we found is oil of Ishtri, and specifically in this convoluted case of Shimon marries first, then dies, and then Reuven marries his sister incorrectly, being Oivern under Rabbanan, and he's married to Rachel. So now Leah is also to him as an Achosisha. If I had not said Allah, I would have said this woman is going to be Chayev and Yibo. Kamash will allow to say no. That just like if Achosisha was said, Aleha by Yibum, so too all of the Arayas are going to be in a matzav of Yibum are going to be us in such case. Fine. That's the first case. Now we're going to see a second case. There's a Hekish. So we've talked about a Binyanav. We've talked about a Klal and the Yotzim and a Klal, the Chadesh and the Yotzim and a Klal. We saw all of these different Yugim Amidas. One thing we haven't discussed yet is maybe there's a Hekish. It says the Gemara, there is a Hekish. Does everyone know what a Hekish is? Let me explain. A Hekish is if, let's say I have something, a good example would be if something is in the same pasuk altogether. So if one halach applies to one, I can now apply it to another.
It's Michas.
It's a little bit different than smuchim. Smuchim is two different psukim. Yeah, v'yatzavahis is a good one. If I have in the same pasuk two words, I can assume I could start darshaning the words of that pasuk. Meaning to say, try to think of it like this. Very balabatish way to think of it. Inside a pasuk, we can assume there is intent in exactly every word and the order. Pasuk to pasuk, not always the case. So smuchim is not just something we're always going to make a drasha, because maybe pasuk aleph and pasuk beis have nothing to do with each other. But within pasuk aleph, if there are some words in there that are extra or there's something going on, hekesh can work. Now a hekesh is very similar in concept to a gzeir shava, and it's actually like in a certain sense almost exactly the same. It's just the difference is a gzeir shava is two different places, the same exact word.
Yes.
Whereas a hekesh is the words don't have to be the same. The reason why you're connecting them is through their proximity in the pasuk, or the fact that they're all in one pasuk. But they accomplish the same idea. They need to be done with a Masorah. You and I can run a Kal V'chomer on our own. If we come up with a good Kal V'chomer, that could work. You don't get to make up hekeshes, and you don't get to make up gzeir shavas. Just like we said, you don't get to make up smuchim. You can't just say, well, I think this pasuk of Erev is right next to this pasuk of Chulei, so you can't do that. You can't just make up smuchim. You can't make up gzeir shavas. So there is a gzeir shava that exists that has a Masorah that connects all of the arayas to each other. That's called what we refer to as the Hekesha de Rabbi Yoina. We'll see what it is in a second. V'ba is a different reason for Aleha, and this is going to stay. This is going to be the second answer. Asya behekesha de Rabbi Yoina. Now we have, without getting too details into the Hekesha de Rabbi Yoina, Rabbi Yoina is talking about that we learn out that the Isser to be with a woman who's an Ereva isn't the full Bia only, even if you just start the Bia. And let's say you start and then you walk away. You've been over on the cars.
Didn't we talk about that already in terms of
I mentioned it in passing as relates to something else, but yeah. Now, meaning this is called ha'ara. It's whatever. It's a sugya we'll get to later on. I don't want to get too detailed. The point is there's a hekesh. The hekesh says once I say it by one of the things, I'm going to say it by all of the things. It only says it by one of the psukim. We learn out from Nida, basically. By the pasuk by Nida, we learn out from there that all of the erevas are going to be the same way.
In Gemara,
Hekesh is a shas term. Yeah, it's one of the. It's a very similar concept to Gzeir Shava, which again is learning one idea out from another, and it happens only b'Misora, only if you have a tradition that this is something you can learn. So this hekesh exists. It predates our Gemara's conversation. It exists already. It's not being created for our Gemara. The question is, how far do we take that hekesh? That hekesh, which teaches me this other halacha, to say that once something's usher by one of the erevas, it's going to be usher by all of the erevas. How far do we take it? Says the Gemara, I might have thought the following. So really, it could have just as easily called it Hekesha de Rabbi Yeshua, Funa Breder of Yeshua. But either way, says the Gemara, the pasuk says as follows: At the end of that parak, Yud Ches in Kedoshim, where it lists off all of these arayas that we've been discussing in our Mishnah, there's a pasuk. It seems to be like a throwaway pasuk. It just sort of seems like a summary pasuk, and it says, anyone who does any of these things that I just mentioned up above, they get kares. Meaning to say, this pasuk sort of combines all of the arayas together. So says Rabbi Yomi, Hukshu kol ha'arayos kulon le'eshesach. They're all connected to eshesach to say the following: Ma eshesach sharye av kol ha'arayos nami sharyan. So this is now really saying the same thing we saw earlier of a binyanav. It's saying the same thing earlier of Mamatzinu, all of these other things that we saw. It's just that now we're coming for the hekesh. So all of the arguments you could have made before of, well, who says you can go from two averas? Eshesach is only one avera. This is two averas. Rashi says here, Rishonim speak out. There's something called ein meshivan al hekesh. A hekesh is strong. It's so strong that it's not a logical thing. It's the Torah saying, trust me, this is the halacha. You don't like it, deal with it. Meaning that's the way a hekesh works. So therefore, says the Gemara, maybe I would have said the hekesh that we typically use for other things, we can apply here and say that just like Eshesach, the erva of an Eshesach is mutter, so too all of the ervas that may come into possibility with a person who's a yavam is going to be mutter. So therefore, Kasav Rachmana Aleh to teach me, no, an erva is still usher. But had I not had the pasuk of Aleh, all our rayos, I would have thought you do yibum. This sort of mirrors a lot more what we had been thinking up until now. That you would have thought all erevas are going to be mutter and yibu. Kamash malan aleha not. Just it's not because of asidich halisa say. It's not because of any other reason. It's because there's a hekesh. The hekesh tells me like this. Amalei ravach midiftil ravina michti. 1 second. Kol harayos ikol leukshino leishes ach veikol leukshino leachosisha. We know this is a pasuk of achosisha, and the pasuk by achosisha says that the erev is aser, and we explained earlier from the brisa that it's even b'makom yibum. That aleha to teach me that achosisha is aser even when she has the mitzvah of yibum. And now you tell me I have another hekesh to tell me, no, let's compare all of the other arayas to eshesach that it's mutter. So that means you have two options of where to plug all of the other arayas in. You can either use the hekesh to achosisha, meaning, and say that they're all aser, or you can use the hekesh and say it's like eshesach and say that it's all mutter.
What is the pasuk?
Again, achosisha has a pasuk.
Right side, Rabbi.
Pasuk of achosisha says. Pasuk of Achosisha says Aleha, and Aleha is also by Yibam, to teach me that the Isser of Achosisha applies even when it's by Yibam.
On the right side.
So it's a hekesh?
It's Akish.
Gimel?
Or it's a, yeah, it's Akish. Yes, that's the Pasuk.
Where's the hekesh? Where's the words of the hekesh?
For which one?
For Isha al-Chaisa.
So it says in the Pasuk, Isha al-Chaisa, it says Aleha.
Yeah.
Aleha, here it's really more Gzeir Shava, but we will interplay the words Hekesh and Gzeir Shava. very. That's why I said before. Gzeir Shava and Hekesh are very similar. Same
So we have this pasuk, Kikol Asher Yaseh V'Kol HaToevos. He puts them all together in a klal. So it's like they all have to be alike.
Yeah.
So you could say, you know,
like what?
If one of them
right.
isn't, then it's
No. What it means is that if one of them happens to have a quality, maybe I could say they all have that quality.
For the other.
Right.
That is saying they're all mutter, like Eshesach. But on the other hand, I have a pasuk of Achosisha to tell me that she's going to be usher when there's a mitzvah of Yibum. And why not say that she's the one that we compare them all to? The Hekesh applies to all of them, all of the arayas together. I throw them all in a boat. And it's like 15 of them in a boat. One of them is usher for sure, and one of them is mutter for sure. Which one should I now use as the whatever the word is to extend it to all the other ones? So Gemara says like this. Ask the Gemara, Michti, kol arayas ukshuna le'eshesach to say it's mutter, v'ikol ukshuna la'achosisha to say it's aser. My chazis the akshus la'achosisha. Why did you choose to say that they're all aser? Why not say ikshina le'eshesach that they should all be mutter? This is the very simple. Meaning to say, and you don't need aleha. The hekesh should tell you that it's all going to be mutter. Sorry, right? Meaning to say in the maskana, why not say that it's all mutter? So Gemara says two answers to why we do it this way. And if you have a choice between making a hekesh to something l'chumra, or you have a hekesh to make something l'kula, it's almost like a savik deraisa l'chumra type of an argument. That if you're not sure, go l'chumra. Okay, so that means you'll compare it to achosisha to say that they're all aser. Iboy is saying a different answer. Hachatre isuri. When you're talking about an achosisha is aser because she's both an eshazach and an achosisha. So then it's trei isura. So v'hachatre isuri, and all of the other arayas will also be two averes, right? The eshazach and whatever they are, bito, whatever, all the other ones. Utrei mi trei alfina, and it's an apples to apples comparison to make a hekesh of like-minded things. Aval hacha, when you're talking about an eshazach, chad isura, that's the only iser. So trei michada lo yalfina, meaning to say, even though before we said ein mishivan ala hekesh, which would have been a reason to say, don't make the argument that you can one from two or two from one. That's only when that's the only hekesh you have available to you. But if you have a choice between going from this hekesh or that hekesh, you obviously want to try to compare it to that which is as similar to it as possible, because why make a bigger chiddush than you have to? Therefore, assume that it's going to achos isha, not to eshes ach. Therefore, it's going to be usher to have yibum with those ladies.
And therefore, we don't need Allah.
No, therefore you do need Allah.
Why?
Meaning I need Allah to teach me, don't do it, because I would have thought to say the hekesh of what's his name? Of Rabbeinu Yonah, Kamash Malon, Allah to teach me, say the hekesh in the other direction.
We want to compare it to Chumra Makshina, we said.
Exactly. So Allah will tell me that. Allah is what tells me Achosish is usher. Even when a matzav of yibum. Right?
There are two choices.
Yes.
You can point to Eshazach.
Step one is I have Achosisha who's Aser in Yibum, and I have Eshazach who's Mutter in Yibum.
Right.
So, and then I have this group in the middle. Do I push them this way, or do I push them that way?
Now we're saying...
So Aleha, which is what's taught me Achosisha is Aser, right? I need to say that pasuk, and then use that to use the Hekesh to make them all the Chumrah. I asked the Gemara, why did you choose to do that? Why not choose to push it this way and say that they're all going to be mutter, right? Says the Gemara, because if I have two answers, either if I have a choice, I go l'chumra, or the second one is if I have to choose the other 13 arayas, which one are they closest to? Other 14 arayas, they're much more similar to Achosisha, who has two averas, whereas an Eshazach only has one. So therefore, I'll be makish that way, le'isr. And that's the maskana, le'isr. That's what Allah teaches me, to do that.
What do you need Allah to do? What can you
if I don't have Allah, then I don't... Well, if Allah didn't exist, let's say the pasuk didn't say Achosisha Allah, then how do I know that an Achosisha doesn't do evil? Allah is what teaches me an Achosisha doesn't do evil. Right? Allah teaches me that an Achosisha doesn't do evil because of Allah. Right? It says Allah by Yibam and the Yevamos by Allah, and it says Allah by Achosisha. Now I know an Achosisha doesn't do Yibam. So now I have two people. I have an Achosisha who doesn't do Yibam, and I have an Eshazach who does. And I have 14 other arayas. I got to figure out what to do with them. Are they more like Achosisha or are they more like Eshazach? The first answer is they're more like Achosisha because that's the Chumrah. Go to Chumrah whenever I have an opportunity to choose which group to go to. According to the second answer, it has nothing to do with Chumrah and Kula. It's more because they're more similar in character to Achosisha, that they both have two Averas, whereas an Eshazach only has one.
So there are two steps. There's the step where we eliminate Achosisha, and then we have to extend it to the other 14.
Then the question is, which way does those 14 go?
Which way to extend it?
Okay. I know it's a lot. So we do need to cover some ground, and Gemara's going weiter are not easy. So not easy. It's just I want to make sure that we're moving on. Okay, so the second answer to the Gemara is, where do I need Allah for? Because otherwise I would have said it's mutter to do even with an erva, because I would have said let's make a hekesh to eshazach, just like Rabbi Yonah. Okay, now we're going to see a third answer, and it's the final answer as to why I need Allah. Rava Amar, and here he's going to, it's really a curveball. Up until now, we have been assuming Erva is Aser in Yibum, and Aleha is teaching me that. Had I not had Aleha, I would have thought that an Erva is Mutter. And we had problems. Why? I said, we don't say that. Binyanav doesn't work. This doesn't work. Clearly, Rava doesn't hold of these two other answers of Hoyle Ishtari. He doesn't like the scenario of Aleha coming to teach me this far-fetched case. Maybe he doesn't like this idea of the hekesh. Maybe he's different. Maybe he's, he argues.
May not accept Ula.
May not accept Ula. He may disagree with Ula on mixes bia. Million different reasons why he doesn't like these answers. So Rava's got to answer the question now. The Brisa said clearly, Aleha is to teach me that you don't do yibum with an erva. Says Rava, no, it doesn't. Amar erva gufa. They changed the gears here. Erva gufa loy tzrich hakra. Really, erva is aser. Why? The Eina said the chilas curse, like we've been saying up until now. We've never changed our mind off of that. You cannot be docha alav sheish by curse with an assay. Therefore, you're right. I do not need Aleha to teach me that. Meaning, this is a paradigm shift in our entire understanding of what we've been thinking up until now. Up until now, we've been saying you might think erva, you might think erva. Don't say erva because Aleha. Now he's saying, no, you would have never thought it. There's no havamina that an erva is going to be mutter. The Torah says you can't sleep with these ladies. That is, there's always and forever. There's no havamina to say that they're going to be mutter, even in a matzav of yibum.
You would have thought without the psukim, or you would have thought only after you read the psukim?
Even without the psukim, never would have thought it. Says Rava, it's an erva. There's no reason to assume it. Why? Because I say that chalisa doesn't work, and all of the other svaras he doesn't like. Rav is of the opinion that really, when you look at that brisa and it says you have the pasuk of Aleth to teach me that you're allowed to marry your erva, you're not allowed to have yibum with an erva, he says lav dafka. How does he explain it? Ki itzrich kra. What's the pasuk of Aleh coming to teach me? Lemeisar tzara. He says it's coming to understand the tzara. Now, before we go into it, let's just remember, what did the brisa say earlier? The brisa is very clear. The brisa said Aleh is to teach me that the erva is aser. Litzror is coming to teach me that both the tzara and the tzara are aser, right? Latzur and then litzror, all three. Okay, so now I have Rava coming along and saying, yeah, you misread the brisa. That's effectively what he says. Rava's not arguing on a brisa, but he's saying, no, Aleha is not coming to teach me erva, it's coming to teach me tzara. So it seems on the surface he's wrong on the first statement and he's wrong on the second statement. Because the brisa says very clearly, litzror is telling me that that's how I know that the tzara is aser, and Aleha is for the erva. He says, no. So before we address the question I just mentioned, the Gemara is just bothered. 1 second. The erva lo yitzricha kra. Actually, it is sort of the question. Are you telling me erva doesn't need a pasuk? V'hatanya ainli Elohi. Meaning the language of the brisa was emphatic. It was you have the pasuk of Aleha, and then it says ainli Elohi. Now I only know the erva. Right? Mishum. Right? Tzarasa minayin. Right? That was the lashon of the brisa. Lashon that we saw earlier. So now you're telling me, Rava, you don't need a pasuk. It's very clear, the brisa. It says, Ainli Elohi. So, Rava, you're right, but really it's lav dafka. It's mishum tzarasa.
What's that step? Ainli Elohi.
Ainli Elohi. What did the brisa say? The brisa said earlier, when it brought the pasuk of Aleh to tell me that you don't do erva, you don't do yibum with an erva, it said, Ainli Elohi. That only tells me you don't do yibum with the erva. What about the erva tzara? The brisa said, Ainli Elohi tzarasa minayin. Right? So
what's going on here?
Meaning it's mashman. Exactly. Meaning it's mash. What's going on the erva? That's the kasha of the Gemara. Rava's answer is no. Mishum sarasa. Meaning that was only being mentioned to get to the next point. Meaning really, I didn't need that pasuk. Aleha is not there for that. We'll see in a moment exactly that Rava in the end of the day is going to use Aleha completely different, and he's explaining the brisa in a different way. All right. So then the Gemara continues and says, "V'hakitani ainli alahain." Meaning once we said this is the din by achosisha, we then said we applied it now to all of the other arayah. Right, through a hekesh, right, through all of it said ainli alahain mishum tzarasei, and that was also because of mishum tzarasei. Meaning the brisa had a repeat of the same type of question. It's mashma in the first. He is talking about the erva. Hain is talking about the other rayas. But the point is, it's very clearly mashma in the brisa that you would need a pasuk for erva. And Rava says in both scenarios, those were only being mentioned in the brisa in a sort of a lav dafka way to introduce the tzaros, where he's saying now you do need a pasuk. Meaning really the pasuk of Aleha, which by the way, Aleha just tells me. Just remember this. All Aleha does, we've been just quoting it, but all Aleha really does is it says that whatever's going on in this pasuk by Achosisha applies also by Yibum. That's all Aleha really did. Because the pasuk says Aleha by Yibum and it says Aleha by Achosisha. So Aleha is just telling me whatever's going on in the pasuk of Achosisha, it's also true when there's a situation of Yibum. That's all we learned from Aleha. So says Rava, that extension of whatever's going on in Achosisha applies into the other case as well. So now the question is like this. How does Rava learn really? What's Rava really saying? I mean, let's just think for a second. He agrees there's a brisa. The brisa says you can't be with an erva and you can't be with the tzaras. Now he's saying, I don't need a pasuk for the erva, but I need a pasuk to tell me that the tzara is what? Tzara is aser. But that's from Litzvah. So Elamai, what we're at this point, what we would be saying is Litzvah tells me you can't be with the erva. Sorry, you can't be with the tzara of the erva. And Allah tells me, only when it's a matzav of even when it's evil. What would be the halacha of the tzara when it's not an amatzav yibum? Which I know sounds like a funny thing. What if you have Reuven, in our
Be
case?
permitted, then it sounds like, or else why do you read the pasuk?
Yeah, meaning, of course
Right.
it would be permitted. Meaning,
Right.
why shouldn't it be permitted?
Right.
Let's say Reuven's married to Rachel.
Yep.
No, do it the other way. Sorry, no. Yeah, let's say Reuven isn't married, and David, unrelated to Reuven, is married to Reuven's daughter,
Right,
and David has another wife. We call her Basia.
right.
If Basia, if David divorces Basia, can Reuven marry her?
It's the wife of the son.
Nope.
Son-in-law.
No, it's none of that.
The
None of that.
son-in-law.
You said
David and Reuven are not related.
Yeah.
I'll show you an example.
Son-in-law, though, right? In colloquial terms.
No. It'd be nobody. In this example, I'm going to erase this. Hope you don't mind.
Yep.
I thought you also son-in-law.
So David marries his daughter. No.
He makes the picture.
David's,
Yeah, once I make the picture, let's get
David's his son-in-law when David
You
married
guys
his
are
daughter.
getting too complicated. We've been discussing Reuben and Shimon because we know Reuben and Shimon are brothers,
Yep.
right? And therefore we have Issurs. But what if it's David?
No line.
These two guys are not related at all. So this would be like me and Colin.
Right.
That's me, that's Colin. Yeah? Now,
Which is me? No.
this guy goes and marries Rachel,
Yep.
who is Reuven's daughter.
So it's son-in-law.
Son-in-law.
What?
So we
Son-in-law.
become
Oh, you mean these? Oh,
Yes.
I didn't follow what you meant.
Yeah.
I thought you meant that. Okay. No.
No.
Yes. David is his son-in-law.
Yeah.
Or he marries a choso me'ima.
What?
What?
He marries any one of Reuven's erevas.
Got it.
Any
Okay.
one of the list in the Mishnah. I picked Vito. You're right, son-in-law. But it's
Yeah.
true even he's not a son-in-law. He's a random dude. Lives in Albuquerque.
Yeah, but he becomes a son-in-law when he marries a daughter. That's the point.
But there's 14 other erevas that this is true to also. Meaning
I
he doesn't
understand.
have to be the daughter or the son-in-law.
He can marry. He can marry. You say
can marry
the
anyone.
wife's sister.
Yeah, you can marry my aunt. You can marry my,
You
my
give
mother's
that
mother.
to say it's in the case. Write it down.
Okay, so let's see. Yeah, Rachel, and we'll call Rachel. Let's make it simple. We'll do
Achosisha, you said.
Achosisha would work, but that complicates matters. We'll do Achosa Me'ima. So Reuven has. That's also a little complicated. We'll pick a better one. Let's do mother-in-law. Marries the mother-in-law,
Hello,
right? So Reuven, what do you call it? Reuven's wife's mother. Yeah.
Right. Yes.
David marries Reuven's wife's mother. Whatever.
Okay.
So now, David and Reuven have zero relation. No blood, no brothers, no nothing. There's no Yibum. There's no Yibum. We're not talking about Yibum. Let's say he's married also, not only to Rachel, he's married to Basia, who again isn't sisters of Rachel. This is a tzara of an erva, right? Basia is the tzara of Rachel, who is an erva.
Yeah.
So this is the tzara erva,
Yeah.
but Shelo b'makom mitzvah. There's no mitzvah. There's no yibum. They're not brothers. So there is no like mitzvah telling them.
Oh.
So why are you bringing the
So you
case
can marry
to
her.
you?
You can marry her.
So there's a chiddush. The chiddush of the according to
Wow,
Rachel,
really?
we're going to see.
That's a hit.
Aleha is going to teach me.
You can marry
You might have thought litzrar means. What does it say? Achos ish is aser. Litzrar legalis ervasa. You might have thought that litzrar means always
Across the border.
across the board, even when there's no yibum. Because again, achos ish is not talking about yibum.
We saw this concept a few blot ago.
Yes, it
briefly.
came up as a
Briefly.
havamina.
Yeah.
Came up as a havamina.
Mhm.
Came up as a havamina in the earlier.
It seems it's something the Gemara is struggling with.
Well, Yevamos is struggling with it.
Right.
She's
I
like,
don't feel
she's
so
like,
bad.
what the heck is going on?
I told Carmen, I said, don't tell me you understand this.
Yeah,
Because
we got to review it.
I would just walk out right
It's
now.
not easy. Okay, so let's see it inside. So again,
It's like Olympic diving. You strive high and then you
break your neck on the way down into the water. Okay, so again, Rava Amar Erva Lo Tzricha Kra. You don't need a pasuk to tell me anything about the Erva. The Erva is going to always be usher. Why? Because you never ever have a mean that she shouldn't be. She's an Erva. The Torah says Erva is usher. It's usher la'ilam. What do I need the pasuk for? I need it for tzara, and even that's not really 100% true. Tzara's Erva of a matzav of Yibum. Also, that's not going to work. Also an erva, like we explained earlier. She's a eishas ach, shalom b'makom mitzvah. Avada, once we tell me that There's no havamina. She's an Eishes. It's an asay big dechel shesh bekaras. We're going to see that really it's only the tzara when they're not married. When they're not brothers. But let's see it inside. Says the Gemara, at this point in the Gemara, we don't know what I just did. At this point in the Gemara assumes that tzara is talking about a tzara in the matzah of Yibum. Says the Gemara, Toshma. It's really a question. And we're going to see this on Amud Beis, if we get to it. Rebbe argues on the earlier brisa. The earlier brisa, which learns everything out from Achos Isha, Aleha. Rebbe learns that entire series of ideas out from a different drush.
Are you going to post this out?
Yeah. He learns from the following. What does it say in the parasha of Achos Isha? It says, the pasuk says,
Oh yes. Yeah.
I'm sorry, yeah. So what does it say in the parasha of Yibum? It says, V'lok chaloi le'isha v'yibma. Right? It says in the end of the pasuk, Ba Yibum, V'lok chaloi le'isha v'yibma. So it could have said, V'lokach lo le'isha v'yibem. Why did it say, V'lokcha lo le'isha v'yibma? There's an extra hey here, and there's an extra hey there. So it says Rebbe. Rebbe's drasha is that those two extra psukim are to teach me the following. V'lokach v'lokcha v'yibma. Lesser tzaros v'arayos. He understands that's where he learns an issur to do yibum with an erva, and that's where he learns that there's an issur to do tzaros. We'll get to Rebbe on Amud Beis. Right now, we're just bringing up Rebbe for one point, which is that Rebbe clearly holds you need a pasuk to tell me erva. You can't say over here what you said before that it means tzaros. Rebbe clearly says erva and clearly says tzaros. So Rava's whole argument is you'll never have a havamina that you ever need a pasuk to tell me an erva. Granted, Rebbe's cholok with that previous brisa where you learn the halacha from, but that you need something to tell me that an erva is going to be aser, that avadi you do. Says the Gemara, Amar le'eser tzaros shalarayas. Rava will say, no, that's not what Rebbe meant, meaning he labdafkas him up also. He says that when Rebbe said tzaros ve'arayas, it means tzaros shel arayos. But really, says the Gemara, hatrei kroid kanasavlei, two psukim are brought. You just told me you don't need anything for erva. Tzaros is just one pasuk. And I'll just point out over here, the Gemara does not say tzaros, which is a question about kiveg or whatever. Says the Gemara, my lav chadla erva v'chadla tzara, meaning to say you're wrong, Rava, and really Rebbe is talking about both, and you need a pasuk for erva. Lo, idi v'idi l'tzara, chadla meser tzara b'makay mitzvah, v'chadla mishri tzara shaloi b'makay mitzvah, what I just drew on the board. And we finally come to the answer of Rava, what he's really saying. Meaning to say, and we're going to explain it in a minute, but once you have a tzara of an erva, I might think tzara of an erva is always that case. I'll say it outside. The Torah says by Achos Isha, don't be with your sister's wife. Sorry, with your wife's sister. And when it says litzror, legalos ervasa. Litzror means even the tzara, meaning we think that means that whenever your Achos Isha is married to a guy, you not only are you not allowed to be with Achos Isha, you can't be with the other lady, even though that guy is not related to you. Yeah, that's the chiddush. The chiddush is you are.
From
Aleha. Meaning, so it would come out that Aleha is not now telling me something that's usher. Aleha is now coming to tell me something that's really technically mutter. Meaning, Litzvar tells me you can't be with Tzaras Erva, only when Aleha, it's a matzav of Yibum. Aleha, only when it's a matzav of Yibum. So now the Gemara just speaks it out. My time of Yabam V'Yabma, B'Mokim Yibum, Hu De'asira Tzara, Shalei B'Mokim Yibum, Shari Tzara. Says the Gemara, that's the explanation of Rava. Rava is going to explain in Rebbe, that what is that second pasuk of Yibum telling me? The first pasuk of Alakha tells me you're not allowed to be, not with the erva, I don't need a pasuk telling me erva. The first pasuk of Alakha is telling me you can't be with the tzara. The second pasuk of Yibum is telling me only when there's a Yibum. But when there's no Yibum, you're allowed to be with the tzara. Amar of Ashi, Masnisa Namideka. Idea of Rava, that you don't need a pasuk to tell me that an erva is going to be usher, because you would have known it anyways. It's V'doyik in the Lashon of the Mishnah.
Before we get that, according to the third Mahalach, Allah is going in Rebbe?
No. We were just using the Rebbe opinion to show Rava's understanding. But Lo'ilam, even in Aleha, the way it works is as follows. I have a pasuk of Achos Isha says that the erva is going to be usher, but that's just a regular erva. I don't need Achos Isha to tell me that an erva is usher b'matzav yibum, because I would never have thought that you need it. Yeah. Well, all Achos Isha is telling me is litzrar, to tell me that the tzara is usher, but even that I wouldn't have needed. Meaning, all litzrar teaches me is that the tzara is always usher. And in order to constrict that halacha to limit it only to when it's talking about Yibam comes along Aleha to tell me that like the Parsha of Yibam is only when there's a dead brother and there's a mitzvah Yibam, so too the Isser Tzara only exists when there's a matzvah of Yibam. And that's literally the only thing I need Aleha for. And says, now Rav Ashi is about to say, is the Mishnah is a little bit meduyik like that. That really, I never needed a pasuk to tell me erva. Because what does the Mishnah say? Rav Ashi must need tsunami day, Tani Chameshes Rei Nashim, Poitros Star said. We never actually discussed the ervas themselves. It just said, these following 15 women, what do? They pater other women. But shouldn't it say, Bilu Peturos to Potros Lokatan? It didn't say they're pater themselves and they're patering others. It only mentioned what they're doing. Mashma, that they're pater, that's so obvious to the Mishnah that it doesn't even need to say it, meaning to say it would have been obvious to us in the Psukim as well, and no need to have a drasha to tell it to me.
You only take the Chiddush of Yibum for what it is.
Exactly.
Patter's one Isser, not an infinite number.
Correct. Correct. So now says the Gemara, 1 second. Right? That was all Rava's reason. So says the Gemara, I don't understand something. Rava, why do I need it by Tzara? Just De'ena said that, right? Tzara nami loiti ba'yikra mishum De'ena said dechalesis. It's just speaking out what we said before. Sheish ba'yikaris. So on this, Amalei Rav Acha bar Bibi, sorry, I read that wrong. Amalei Rav Acha bar Bibi mar leravina. Hachi kamar mishmei de Rava. This is Rava's explanation. Tzara nami loyitzrikra. Meaning, this is just the Gemara speaking out slowly what I said before. That the Tzaras Erva is also, I don't need a pasuk.
What is Litzvah?
Litzvah tells me that all Tzaras Erva are aser. I don't need a pasuk to tell me that the Tzaras Erva of a Yavam is aser. I need a pasuk to tell me that the Tzaras Erva of a non-Yavam is mutter. Ki yitzrikra lemishri tzara shalei b'makom mitzvah.
Which pasuk?
Such a paradox.
What happened? Where's going?
So right now at the top of the Gemara on Daf Chesam Amud Beis, what we just basically said was that since it says Litzvah would have meant all tzaras are aser, all tzaras erva, all tzaras of an achosisha are aser, and anyone like an achosisha. Allah comes to tell me not like that. That's literally my timer. Amakra aleh b'makam aleh hu de asira shalei b'makam aleh sharia.
In the David case?
No, Yibum. Yes. This is the David case. The case where there is no mitzvah Yibum, and therefore the Tzaras Erva is mutter. Why? Because the Torah, when it asters the Tzara, only asks the Tzara, Aleh is Makom Yibum. So according to Rava, the third answer as to why I need Aleh, it has nothing to do with, I would have thought you're supposed to do Yibum with an Erva Kamashmal, and you don't. Adarabba. There's no Havamina to say you would ever do Yibum with an Erva. In fact, there's no Havamina to think you'd ever do Yibum with a Tzaras Erva. The Havamina was, I might think that it's even usher to have Bia with a woman who is a Tzaras Erva when it's not through a Matzav of Yibam, and on that, Kamash Milan, Rava from Aleha, not like that.
What's normal about this? Okay.
This is pretty normal. Tomorrow's much more fun. I don't understand. You tell me, Rava, why do I think that Tzaras, if you thought until now you're bothered, this is the next line of the Gemara. So, Tzaras Erva, if it's not in a mitzvah Yibam, we're saying now is mutter. Why? I would have thought it's usher. It's just that since I have the pasuk of Aleha tells me that everything going on in Achosisha is only true when there's a mitzvah Yibam. Says the Gemara, well, what else is going on in the pasuk of Achosisha? Not just Tzara, Achosisha. Maybe the Isser Achosisha, the Erva of Achosisha, is only true when she's a Yevama. Meaning, Rabbi, you'd be allowed to marry your wife's sister, according to this Havamina of the Gemara.
But in Torah it's not true.
Where does it say it? And it also says Aleha in the pasuk. And Aleha tells me it's only talking about Yibam. So only when.
Not a Torah.
You don't need a Torah. The Torah says Aleha to tell me it's only talking about Yibam.
Why is it different every other Erva?
The other Arabs don't say Aleha in it.
The reductio ad absurdum. We're saying if
don't say that word.
Pasuk,
You just look, whoever was following you just completely.
If this whole pasuk is about Yibum,
The whole Havamina to say that a Tzara is going to be usher when she is not a Yevama, and I need Aleha to tell me no. That whole entire pasuk is only talking about Yibum. So then even the Erva to begin with is only talking about Yibum. So says the Gemara, maybe a Nerach Achosisha should be completely mutter. And by the way, once you say that, all of their ayahs should be mutter. Only in a matzav. Should be mutter when it's not a matzav of Yibam. Because the Hekesh, the Rabbi Yonah would tell me that I'll expand it. Meaning, again, you'll say what you'll say. Why? Here, you could say, no, Adarab, you don't have the answers from before of two Isurim. You don't have the answers before because we're going Leheter, we're not going Le'Isur. Okay. So the Gemara responds to that by saying, what do you mean? V'lav kal v'chaymeru, v'mokeh mitzvah asira. When the Torah says you could do a mitzvah, it's still going to be asur. Shlo b'mokeh mitzvah. When the Torah doesn't say it's a mitzvah, you're going to say it's mutter? Of course it should be asur. Meaning the only scenario we should say it's mutter is if the Torah says do it. If the Torah says don't do it, then avada, it's asur. Right? If there's no mitzvah telling you to do it, so the Gemara says, Amrlei tzara tochiach. What do you mean? You can have a tzara. A tzara has an isser when there is a mitzvah, and when there's no mitzvah of yibum, the tzara is mutter. So that a kal v'chomer you can ask a kasha on. So the Gemara said, right? T'bemoka mitzvah asiru shlo b'moka mitzvah sharia. So he says, Amrlei, you're right. Really, that's a great havamina. I might think that achos isha, and by extension, all of arayas would be mutter. Meaning, this is, what did they say? I think the Rogan Shavagod said he wouldn't let people into his yeshiva unless he could find like 50 ways to be matahir or sheretz. The Torah says mefurish, sheretz is tameh. But if he could find the lumdis way, we're literally like uprooting like 20 psukim in the middle of Achrimos, or Kedoshim, Achrimos, from this argument.
We're saying they apply to Yibum. We're not saying they literally.
Right, but we're turning those 15. We're saying no. We're limiting those psukim to only talking about Yibum.
Without mixing the word Yibum.
Rare case.
Aleha is by Yibum. Yibam yavay Aleha. Aleha is by Achosisha. Litzra is legala servasa Aleha bechayeha. Aleha tells me whatever's going in the pasuk of Achosisha is only true when it's a matzav of Yibum. So says the Gemara, a really absurd havamina to our sensitive ears, because we know that an Achosisha and all of the arayas are always going to be aser. So the Gemara says you're right. That's a very good havamina. Says the Gemara, and I'll tell you where we learn a pasuk to tell me not like that. Alecha amar kra. That's why it says in the pasuk of Achosisha bechayeha. Bechayeha teaches me kol shebechayeha, meaning to say no matter what. Everything going on this pasuk, meaning Aleha would have told me only Yibum, but Bechaya tells me no. It's going in for her entire life, even when she's not in a mitzvah Yibum. Gemara says, 1 second. You can only say that if the word Bechaya isn't needed for something else. Says the Gemara, isn't Bechaya needed for the etzem halacha that we know that an achos tisha is only usher kol zman your wife's alive? But if the wife dies, now all of a sudden her sister becomes mutter. Isn't that what the word Bechaya means? Meaning to say, I don't have anything available for me to teach me that the arayas isn't limited to Yibum. Says the Gemara, no. If you just read the psukim, it says V'isha el achosa, meaning to say they're both alive. Meaning that's, so the Gemara says, no. That just means that she's called your Isha. However, if I wouldn't have the words B'chayeha, I might think that the Isser of Isha Elachosa is only applicable while you're married. But if you divorce her, you're allowed to be with her.
Yeah. What's Ahima Isha Elachosa?
We just said that the halacha is that you're not usher in your wife's sister unless your wife is still alive, right?
Yeah. Right.
And how do I know that? I know that from Bechaya. That's what, and therefore Bechaya is not available. Teach me that all of the arayas are going to be usher, even not b'makom yibum. So the Gemara says, but I can accomplish learning out that the halacha is true, that the erva is only going to exist when your wife is alive, from the fact that the Torah calls this Isser the Isha El Achosa. It's talking about your wife, who is the sister of your wife, which means she's now your wife. Doesn't that by definition mean she's alive? We wouldn't call her your wife anymore unless she's alive. So doesn't that inherently mean she's alive? Therefore, leaving me available. Says the Gemara, no. Ime ve'isha El Achosa, all it's doing is telling me that she's your wife. I might think that it's even true if you divorced her, because then she's no longer your wife. That's not enough. So Havi Amin and Isgar Sheshare. So therefore, I need Bechayat, Talmud Lomer Bechayat, to teach me, right? That Talmud Lomer Bechayeha, to tell me that it's going to be Aser. Kol Shebechayeha to Afagav Din Isgar Shalo. So the question basically is, I don't have Bechayeha left to teach me that an erva of Achosisha is going to be Aser even when there's no Yibam. He had a separate, Rava had a separate problem, and that separate problem is going to answer. He says, look at the pasuk of Achosisha. It says two things, and it seems to be saying two conflicting ideas. Ksiv isha el achosa lo sikach litzuror. Litzuror is mashma that two people are going to have an isser, isha and achosa. Yeah, I mean, even though we darshan litzuror for something else, but the pasuk's pshuto reading litzuror is a double lashon. That's mashma that both the Isha and the Achaisa, sorry, not the Isha and the Achaisa, that's mashma the Isha, the Erva, and the Tzara are going to be Aser. Litzwer is mashma two people, right? Not Lotzer, Litzwer. Uksiv legalos erva sa. The pasuk then says at the end, it's only referring to one erva. So inherently in the psukim, it's on the one hand talking about two isurim, one's talking about the tzara and one's talking about the erva, and the other one is mashma. It's only talking about the erva, the chada mashma. So Haketz Rava says. So he says exactly the way he answers it. He says b'makay mitzvah shtein asuras. When there's a mitzvah yibum, both aser, meaning tzara and erva. Shalom b'makay mitzvah. When there's no makay mitzvah, meaning it's just a regular case like the David case, then he asura, the erva is asura, meaning because the erva is asur lo'ilam, it's a rasa muteris, right? Meaning to say, what did Rava just say? We asked the question. B'chayeha is not available. Why? Because B'chayeha has got to teach me that she's got to be dead in order for the Avera to be there, right? So the Gemara says, I have two psukim, right? I have a steer in the psukim. So says Rava, the way I'm going to understand it, I'll make this chiluk, meaning to say, I don't need to have a pasuk. I don't need to go to B'chayeha. I have a steer in psukim. I'll say this answer in Svara. That obviously the Torah is inherently telling me that although, yes, Aleha tells you only in Yibum, that's going on the part that says when they're both Aser, meaning Erva and Saras Erva. The other part of the pasuk that's saying that only one person's Aser, that's talking about when it's not going about Yibum, clearly, meaning that's what I would have said on my own, says the Gemara.
And therefore, I don't need
Not that I don't need it, and therefore, I don't need B'chaya anyways, and therefore, I can explain that when there's no matzav of Yibum, the only person who's going to be Aser is the Erva. Meaning to say, I can say that the Erva applies always. So I don't need B'chaya to teach it to me, because the pasuk itself is telling it to me. By just saying Erva Sa, it's only one lady. So says the Gemara, that only works if you assume that the two that are Aser are talking about when it's matzav of Yibum, and the one that's Aser is only when it's not Yibum. Why not Epachana? Say it's the opposite. Meaning you have no right to assume it's going in that direction. Maybe say that when it says the Tzara and the Ish and the Erva are Aser is talking about Shalom b'makom Yibum. Right? Meaning why? Because Erva is Aser and Litzror is Aser. But maybe by matzav of Yibum you'll say that who's Aser the Erva, but the Tzara is Mutter. Says the Gemara, Epachana, b'makom mitzvah hi Asura v'tzarasa muteres. The Shalom b'makom mitzvah, when there's no Yibum, like the case of David, shteim asuras.
The mitzvah should allow more stuff.
Exactly. And it makes a ton of sense. It's logical to assume that. When there's a mitzvah Yibum, we'll try to be matter as much as possible. When there's no mitzvah, maybe Tzara is always Aser. And on that, the Gemara says, you're right. However, Im Kain lo yemer aleha, then I don't even need the pasuk of aleha. What would I have said had I not had the pasuk of aleha? And I would come to this pasuk and I would have had the stira. On the one hand, I think I see two people Aser. And on the other hand, I see only one person being Aser. I would have said, well, obviously I have to figure out how to deal with that discrepancy. I probably would have said, well, when are they Aser, both Aser? That's when you have no mitzvah telling you not to do it, or no mitzvah telling you to do it. So therefore, that must be talking about where there's no Yibum, right? Where is it where only one of them are Aser and one of them is Mutter? There must be a reason saying to do it. What is that? Must be talking about a scenario of Yibum, even without Aleha. So then obviously Aleha can't be coming to tell me that. I wouldn't have needed it. So therefore, the Torah says Aleha, therefore I conclude from there that it must be the other way, that Aleha is telling me a new idea, meaning it's telling me not to think what I would have said. Well, now what that means is I would have said that when is the Torah saying that the two are mutter? When is the Torah saying the two are aser? Specifically, Aleha tells me only when there's Yibum. But when there's no Yibum, in the case of David, then only the Erev is aser, the Tzara is not, but Lo'ilam, all of the Arayas are aser Lo'ilam. Amalei Rav Ashi Rav Kahana. This entire idea is predicated on the idea that the word Aleha is coming to tell you that it's aser. Maybe say that when it says Aleha, it's coming to tell me that it's mutter. Meaning maybe say that they're both mutter. When it says litzror, which is mashma two ladies, it means the erva and the tzara is mutter. When it's in yibum, right? Meaning to say completely mutter.
By an erva. By
an erva and by her tzara. And the pasuk, right? So says the Gemara, Dilma lehetera v'hachikam rachmana. This is how it'll mean. Isha el achosa lo sikach litzvar. That's talking lo hi v'lo tzarasa, right? Shalom b'makam aleha. That's only when there's no mitzvah sibum. When there's no mitzvah sibum, you can't be with an erva and you can't be with the tzara of an erva. Haval b'makam aleha. But when there's a matzav of yibum, shtei and mutaras. I'll say you do yibum not only of a tzara but even of an erva. And again, that will fit Who says Aleha is coming to tell you Isser? Maybe it's coming to tell you Heter.
It's hard to read the pasuk that way. Isha
In the Pashup shot. Yeah.
The pasuk, most sigach for legalis ervasa Aleha. Doesn't say shalobim come Aleha.
Yeah. It's really more a drush that comes from had Aleha not been there. But yeah, correct.
Okay.
So Gemara says no. If you do that, you're left with what? You're left with when there's a mitzvah of Yibam, you're mutter to do Yibam in both the Erva and the Tzara. And when there's no mitzvah Yibam, it's also to do have Bia with the Erva and the Tzara. Im kain legalos Erva.
No, then it's mutter.
Meaning they're either both mutter or they're both usher.
Right, we're saying that when
The Gemara's question is why not say Allah is lahatir, meaning that when there's no mitzvah sibum, they're both usher. When there is a mitzvah sibum, they're both mutter. Says the Gemara, you're right, you could have done that. However, in Kain, the stira and the psukim doesn't get fixed. In Kain legalos erva the chada heichim mishkachas la. Remember, we had a drasha, we had a diuk in the pasuk that there's a scenario where only one is usher. According to you, you've just created either two usher or two mutter. Ibimake mitzvah shtei and mutaros, according to you, and ishlibimake mitzvah shtei and asuros. They're both usher. Okay, very complicated, but let's take a step back. One second, let's take a step back. Let's just take a step back. The pasuk says Aleha b'chayecha, right? And we learned earlier that I need Allah to tell me that you don't do yibum with your erva. Havamina would have been you do. First reason is because of oil v'ishter in that complicated case where Shimon dies first, marries first and dies first. The second answer was there was a hekesh. We're going to make a hekesh. Which way do we make the hekesh? We make the hekesh to Eishes Ach. I would have had a Havamina to say that Kamash Milan be Makish le'Isser and say that no, it's us. Those are the first two answers. Then Rava came along and said a complicated answer, but really he basically said, just to simplify it, what is Allah teaching me? Not erva, not tzara. It's coming to teach me the tzara of an erva when they're not married to a brother. That's effectively what Rav is telling me. Now, how do you get it in the psukim? The way it goes is according to Rav is as follows, based on the Bryce that we saw earlier. The Torah says, don't be with your achos isha. And it's an erva that, because it says in the Torah, aleha, and aleha is b'matzav of yibum, I might think that entire pasuk is only talking about yibum, and really la'olam in outside of yibum, completely mutter. Sarah, erva, completely mutter. Kamash Malan, the fact that the pasuk itself has a stira minei ubei, where it's mashma in some scenarios her and the Torah are usher, and in other scenarios only someone is usher. So Rava explains that tells me that aleha tells me that it'll be when it's yibum they're both usher, and when it's not yibum the erva is usher, because an erva is usher forever, but a tzara is going to be mutter. And that's how Rava learns. And that's what it effectively comes out in the Maskana of the Gemara. Yeah. It gets still complicated again. Now, this was all explaining the Brisa, where Aleha is coming to tell me a Chiddush. Gufa. We quoted Rebbe on Amud Aleph. Rebbe had a different way to learn. We mentioned it briefly. Velokach and Velokcha, Yabam Yama. He understood it meant. Now, Rava explained Rebbe different. Rava explained that even Rebbe is only coming to talk about the Tzara, where there's no mitzvah. Rebbe himself never said that. Rebbe himself just said the following words: Rebbe Omer v'lokach v'lokcha v'yibim v'yibma le'eser tzaros v'arayos. And we're going to leave that. We're going to now assume Rebbe is not like Rava and assume that really I do need a pasuk. Let's go back to the normal schedule programming. That I would have thought that erva is going to be aser. Says the Gemara, midi tzaros ksivacha. Right? Where bothered Rebbe? How do you get tzaros from this pasuk? Lokach v'yabma.
You can't just make it up.
You're making up the word tzaros. At least before we had litzra. Mm-hmm. Where do you get tzaros? He says, tzaros mi litzra nafka. That we know that everyone agrees that tzaros erva comes from litzra. He says litzra mapikle Rebbe look at the Rebbe Shimon. He says litzra is not available for tzaros. So that he deals with that question first. Now, what's the case of Rebbe Shimon? It's a Gemara a lot later. It's the case I mentioned before, 3 brothers where 2 of them are married to sisters and the 2 brothers die, leaving 2 sisters coming to Reuven. What's Reuven supposed to do? Technically, each one of them is the achos kukos, so we're not going to get into that. So the point is, Litzor is coming to teach me over there what he's supposed to do. He's supposed to do chalitza, whatever. The point over here, or maybe he doesn't do chalitza, maybe it's to teach me like Reb Shimon that you don't even need chalitza. We'll get to that Gemara later on. So therefore, I don't have Litzor to teach me tzara serva. So Rebbe, how do you get tzara from the lakach v'yabma?
So according to Shimon B'Doraisa, you wouldn't do it?
Yeah.
From this pasuk. But everyone else says B'Drabanan, you wouldn't do it?
Everyone says over there that in that scenario, you would do chalitza with one of them, and you'd be good.
And that's the
and that's
you're not allowed to do.
Because you're not allowed to do, exactly. Yeah. Because of achos kukasa.
Yeah.
Each one of them is in it.
So Shimon makes it the right.
Yes, which is a tremendous chiddush. Yeah. Okay. So says the Gemara, so we're still stuck. Rebbe, how do you get tzara out of the pasuk v'lokach v'yabam? Right? It says v'lokcha v'yabma. You marry her and you made yibam to her. Where do you see tzara here? Says Rabbi, tzara heichiksiv hachikamer im kain lemakra v'lokach my v'lokcha. What's the extra hey? Kol heicha deika trei lekuchin. It's a drush on the word lekach, meaning when the yibam situation is where you have trei lekuchin, the iboy nosiv high, the iboy nosiv high, meaning you can marry either one of them, meaning there's no erva, and you could therefore marry any one of them. Sharia, then it's mutter. The ilo provayu asur, but if you don't, then one of them is asur because she's an erva. Guess what? The other one's also asur. So lakach ve'lakcha teaches mitzaras because it tells you need to be able to marry both. But if you can't marry one of them, you can't marry none of them. Why? Because there's no yibum by a tzara. That's how he gets tzaras erva. Now that's good from velakcha. What do I use from v'yibma for? V'yibma b'mokim yibum hu de'asir tzara shlei b'mokim yibum shar yitzara. He's also coming to tell me the state. So we accomplish everything with Rebbe. Rebbe basically gets from velakach from v'yibma to tell me. I would have thought that. Now you'll notice, by the way, the way we just explained Rebbe, there's no chiddush for erva, right? Meaning, the way we just explained Rebbe, if I asked you, how does Rebbe know you don't do yibum with an erva?
It says velakcha.
No, velakcha tells me tzara. So this is the ultimate explanation of what Rava was trying to say on Amud Aleph, and Rava said, I don't hold you need a pasuk by erva.
No.
Rebbe says you do. No. What Rebbe means is the tzaras of an erva, and we just explained it in detail. Velakcha tells me tzaras only in a matzav of yibum, but not when it's David's
every
case.
stuff you know by itself.
But every you would know because eina sedech v'leiseshish bekaris. Exactly. Now let's go back. V'Rabbanan, the Brisa who learns from Aleha. What do they do with these psukim? Hay velakcha may avdilei, right? Meaning we just said Rebbe uses these very creatively. Lakach, it should say. Why does it say velakcha? He understands the word velakha to teach me that once a person does yibum, she's your ishtar l'chol davar. And let's say the guy would divorce his wife now, the Yevama. Would you say that she's still an eshazach? Or no? Once he did yibum, she's completely going to be his wife forever. Says Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina, she's his wife forever. So much so that not only does she get it right now if he divorces her, but he can be master her as long as she hasn't gone and married someone else. Okay, what does he do with V'yabma? V'yabma, I know it's tough. And I honestly appreciate that you guys are sitting through it. This is a tough Gemara. I just want to acknowledge. I don't want to
say this stuff forever.
Yeah, I don't want you to feel that this is representative of what we're going to be seeing going forward. I mean, some of the Gemaras are going to be challenging. Today's Gemara was particularly difficult.
I have a problem with it. With the terminology.
Yeah, it's hard. And honestly, I wish I could. Every moment when I'm using a difficult word, translate, but it'll slow it down even more than we're doing now.
You gotta follow with the article. The article will explain it. If you don't follow with the article,
if you're just listening, it's going to be very challenging.
No, I was following along. I thought you were
finishing
finishing
up. You have to follow along.
Yeah.
It's impossible.
So says the Gemara like this. So what do I do with V'yabma, that second pasuk? Al karcha, that's telling me the halacha of karcha. Now, we didn't mention it earlier, but the halacha is that you can do yibam al karcha. You can force a woman to do yibam. And again, it doesn't mean you should, meaning we saw earlier that if a woman doesn't want to be with a person who's a mukashchin, is really sort of the decrepit looking man, she has the right to say, I'm not interested, and we don't force her. Meaning, she doesn't have to do the yibum. If he went ahead and jumped and did the yibum, it works. That's what it means. It just means that it works. We're not saying he should do it. But if he did, which by the way is not true by Kiddush, the man says, take this money, I want you to be my wife. Doesn't work. She has to say, yes, I want to be your wife.
You're locked in my basement. So
Doesn't
my proposal.
Well, yeah, I mean, effectively, that's what yibum is. Yeah. Says the Gemara, Rebbe. Now let's flip back. Rebbe uses these psukim for his whole explanation of tzaras. So where is he going to learn these two halachas for? Rebbe, the Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina Mili Ishanav. He learns it out from another pasuk of Elisha. We won't go into the details of exactly how the drasha works, but whatever, there's a drasha where he understands from Elisha to teach me the din that once you do yibum, you give her a get, and if she goes away, if you divorce her, you can remarry her. He understands that that's learned from the actual pasuk of Yevama, meaning even Bal Karcha, and the Rebbe Hay Aleha my Avidle. So then Rebbe, what does he do with Aleha? Last line. Okay, we'll get to this tomorrow. This is the next slav in the Gemara. This next line of the Gemara, what does Rebbe do with Aleha? Is going to take us the whole Amud of Taftes. Taftes Amud Aleph moves fairly quickly.
Rebbe never used Aleha?
No.
You
got everything from there. Now you have to say something. Lokach ve'lokcha yibam ve'yibma is in the parsha of yibam, so you don't have to discuss arayas. he assumes a raya sarasar because now once that's the case, I have a diak in Yibum itself to tell me tzara sarasar. So I don't have to worry about that. Isha and Aleh. So Aleh is completely open and available. So what am I going to do with Aleh? He's going to tell me. It's going to tell me something having to do with the Par Helam Davar Shal Tzipor, which is, don't ask me when. So yeah.
I feel like Lekacha and Yevamos should be a meal.
Have a great
right?